I'm going on a trip to Rome to see St. Peter's Basilica. Cool. I'm going on a trip to Baghdad to see the old Church of the East. Not exactly the kind of conversation you've probably heard before. And that's because for most people today, the ancient debates between different branches of Christianity, debates like Nestorianism versus Chalcedonian Christianity, feel like dry, abstract theology with no real-world impact. Two groups of Christians argued about how exactly Jesus was both God and man. Sounds like a bunch of philosophers splitting hairs, right? But here's the thing, these weren't just tiny differences in wording. These debates shaped entire civilizations, split churches across continents, and even influenced how Christians viewed their relationship with God. And if we actually take the time to understand the differences, we start to see why they mattered so much, not just for theology nerds, but for how millions of people worshipped, prayed, and lived their lives for centuries. So, what's the deal? What is Nestorianism, and why did it clash so hard with the version of Christianity that came out of the Council of Chalcedon? Let's break it down. Nestorianism is named after Nestorius, a 5th century archbishop of Constantinople. His big concern was protecting the distinction between Jesus' humanity and his divinity. Nestorius argued that Jesus had two complete and separate natures, one fully divine, one fully human, to the point where it almost sounded like Jesus was two persons. He didn't like calling Mary Theotokos, meaning God-bearer or Mother of God, because to him, that suggested God himself was born like a human. Nestorius preferred Christotokos, meaning Mother of Christ, because he thought that kept the two natures of Jesus more distinct. Chalcedonian Christianity, on the other hand, came to a different conclusion about how to express this mystery. In 451 AD, at the Council of Chalcedon, church leaders declared that Jesus is one person with two distinct natures, fully divine and fully human, united in one person without confusion, without change, without division, without separation. They didn't deny the two natures, but they insisted they were joined so closely that Jesus was one person, not two. Mary could rightly be called Theotokos because the child she bore wasn't just a man, it was God the Son incarnate. Now, at first glance, you might think, wait, these positions sound almost the same. Jesus has two natures in both cases. Why did this cause so much chaos? The truth is, the differences seem subtle in wording, but they had massive implications for how Christians understood the incarnation, God becoming human, and what that meant for salvation and humanity's relationship with God. For Nestorian Christians, the emphasis was on preserving the full humanity and full divinity of Christ as two distinct realities. This approach appealed to some because it made Jesus feel relatable as a human, while still being divine. But critics said Nestorius' teaching divided Christ too much, almost making him two separate beings who were loosely cooperating rather than truly united. If Jesus wasn't one person, how could he fully reconcile God and humanity? How could his death and resurrection bridge the gap between heaven and earth if there were effectively two Jesuses, one human, one divine? Chalcedonian Christianity argued that their formula preserved both truths without splitting Christ into two. By insisting Jesus was one person, they emphasized that every action of Christ, whether suffering, teaching, or rising from the dead, was the action of the one divine human Lord. This made salvation feel more direct. God himself, not just a human partner, suffered and died for humanity. At the same time, because Jesus was truly human, his obedience and suffering were genuinely human acts, making him a perfect mediator between God and man. But these theological nuances didn't just stay on paper. They shaped whole Christian traditions. The churches that followed Nestorian teaching, often called the Church of the East, spread widely across Persia, India, and even into China. They became known as a distinct branch of Christianity, separate from both the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox worlds. Meanwhile, the Chalcedonian formula became the cornerstone for what we now recognize as mainstream Catholicism and Orthodoxy, forming the backbone of most of global Christianity. So why does this matter beyond church history trivia? Because these debates reveal two radically different ways Christians thought about the incarnation and the relationship between God and humanity. For Chalcedonians, the Incarnation was God Himself stepping fully into human existence, permanently uniting Himself with humanity in one person. This had sweeping implications. It meant the physical world, human suffering, and even death itself were taken up and transformed by God. Salvation was about being united with this one divine human person, who shared our life and death to give us His life. For Nestorians, the focus leaned more toward the cooperation between the divine and the human. Jesus, in His divinity, remained above, and in His humanity, walked among us, with the two working together perfectly. Critics worried this view made salvation feel more distant, as though God remained separate and only connected with humanity through a sort of partnership rather than a true union. But Nestorianism appealed to those who feared the opposite extreme, that Chalcedonians blurred the line between God and man so much that the divine could be diminished. And here's the kicker: these ancient debates didn't really end. They still echo today in how different Christian groups approach worship, prayer, and even how they picture Jesus. Is Jesus mainly a relatable human teacher who points us to God? Or is He God Himself, fully present, drawing us into divine life? These emphases often trace back, consciously or not, to the Nestorian-Chalcedonian split. Some people today dismiss all this as irrelevant, just old bishops fighting over Greek words. But for the people at the time, and for many today, it wasn't just about words. It was about how you experience God. Is God so transcendent that He needs a human partner to bridge the gap? Or is He so intimately united with humanity that every part of our existence can be transformed by Him? Your answer shapes how you worship, how you pray, and how you view your own humanity in relation to God. And maybe that's why these debates caused such deep rifts in the church. They weren't just disagreements over language, they were disagreements over how Christians live out their faith. For Nestorian Christians, their tradition would develop a strong focus on mission and scholarship, often thriving in cultural crossroads where they had to emphasize the human side of Jesus to connect with non-Christian societies. For Chalcedonian Christians, their worship and theology leaned heavily into mystery, sacraments, and liturgy, reflecting the belief that in Christ, heaven and earth truly meet in one person. So, while it's easy to think of Nestorianism and Chalcedonian Christianity as two nearly identical positions, the truth is their subtle differences led to two very different visions of the Christian life. And whether we realize it or not, those differences still ripple through Christianity today. The next time someone says these ancient councils don't matter, remember, they didn't just shape theology. They shaped entire cultures, empires, and ways of seeing God. And for millions of people, the way you answer the question, who is Jesus, doesn't just change how you talk about Him, it changes how you live, worship, and even how you see yourself in relation to the divine.